Welcome everyone to a brand new episode of the Radiohead Retrospective, where this week we are continuing our deep plow into the discography of the famous English alternative rock slash electronic slash they're fucking Radiohead, and we're talking about
plowing into Tom York.
Plowing into the fields of Tom York. And today we're talking about their fifth studio album, 2001's Amnesiac, which turns 20 this year, and is certainly an interesting moment in their discography. So up to this point, we have focused, we've basically, every record that we've talked about, I mean, with the exception of Pablo Honey, but that was more laying the groundwork. But every record we've talked about so far has kind of been like this event album, which has represented a kind of like seismic shift in alternative music, alternative rock music that has come with Radiohead being the figureheads. And that kind of climaxed, if you will, with Kid A, which is this incredibly, influential, important, and revolutionary album that entirely changed basically everyone's perceptions of what Radiohead were and laid the groundwork for so much of what would be to come in alternative indie and all kinds of music in the 2 decades that would follow. And so Amnesiac, by comparison, gets less talked about for obvious reasons. I think it exists to a certain extent in the shadow of Kid A. It consists of songs that were recorded at the same time as the songs on Kid A, but I would and I suspect that it will be a more divisive record than Kid A because of the way that its whole existence, its very nature, the way that this album is constructed is almost a riposte to Kid A. It's almost like deliberately going against so much of what that record did, while not veering too wildly from the sonic palette that it established. It's a strange album for Radiohead. And the thing I want to lead off with is just kind of a discussion point is, and because I don't know, maybe you'll all agree with me here, or maybe some of you will disagree with me, but a lot of the way this record often gets framed is as Kid A B-sides or Kid A leftovers or Kid A, lesser tracks or whatever. And so I want to just lead off straight away before kind of getting into my thoughts or whatever. What do you guys think of this perception of Amnesiac? And what do you guys think of the way that this record kind of presents itself in relation to Kid A?
Just as like a jumping off point, honestly, I think it's like, I see the album itself maybe being divisive, but I feel like this particular take won't be, just because like, this is the point of doing the retrospective the way we're doing it in the first place, but like talking about it in reference to Kid A just kind of doesn't really mean anything, because like, yeah, you can talk about how it's recorded in the same sessions. People say it's like, B-sides, blah, blah, blah. But like, there is an obvious identity to this album that Kid A doesn't have, but I just think that it basically does both a disservice, just because there's like, other than the fact that they were recorded in the same sessions, that's really the only thing they have in common. And when people just say, oh, this is Kid A B-sides, it's like, all right, but you're not talking about the album. And that's like most of the discussion I see online about it is just like, it's just this. It's like, but it's not as good. And like, irrespective of what I actually think about it, I just think we should veer away as much as we can from talking about it in reference to Kid A, just because it in and of itself is an interesting enough beast to tackle on its own.
I think it's all too often you see the very discussion point. What do you prefer, Kid A or Amnesiac? Of course, a question meant to spark controversy, but the point being that that while I think in a sense their existence to each other is it is kind of integral that one exists in relation to the other. I also think, like you say, that they're each worth judging on their own merits irrespective of the other.
It's just saying that it's sort of Kid A B-sides, it's a very easy lane to exist in, and it's a way that basically discussion stops after that point when this album is so rich. I mean, the band have said that it represents a different mindset when writing, and I think that's the most full way that you can express the sentiment that it's essentially sort of Kid A B-sides. My comparison point, for obvious reasons, has been the last two albums Where the Mountain Goats actually they are two albums that definitely come from a
I thought about
creative
that.
place, right? But they are very clearly, there's a line down the middle. This is saying this, and this is doing this other thing.
Now, Morgan, what's your perspective on this? Because I know you're not like hugely hot on this record, and what's your perspective on approaching this album?
Yeah, it's complicated because I definitely agree that, you know, saying Amnesiac is just Kid A B-sides is reductive and doesn't do the album justice. But that's also like inescapable. It's like it's not that it lives in the shadow of Kid A and can't escape that the identity of that record or anything. It's more that I think it struggles to find an identity within itself, and it thus sort of gives off the feeling of being a B-sides album to something. But the B-sides album that it would sound like is, you know, it doesn't sound like the B-sides to Kid A.
I agree completely
Yeah.
with everything you just said. Yes,
Yeah, and
100%.
And I think because the album is so exploratory, without, I feel anyway, without being as conceptually unified as Kid A or even OK Computer, it suffers a bit from that, just because it never can, to me, tie itself together in the way those previous records do.
So that's an interesting point. Like, I think I agree that you can't like entirely divorce this record from Kid A when discussing it. Like, you can't ignore the context of the fact that it follows quickly in the footsteps of Kid A, and obviously recorded at the same time. But also, like, I think there's a clear distinction where you can see why some songs were selected for one record and other songs were put onto the other record. And I do feel, and I'm interested to see how, because I know Morgan and I are basically opposed on this, but I'm curious to see, Saoirse and August, where you fall on this. I do feel that Amnesiac has its own identity, and I do feel that it has its own kind of loose conceptual framework, or at least broadly in terms of the feeling that this record evokes in relation to Kid A. We talked about Kid A as this kind of really sort of cold, glitchy, sort of really oppressive and isolating experience. And it's not that Amnesiac is none of those things, but Amnesiac has this kind of different flavor of darkness to it. It is.
I would describe it as antagonistic.
Yeah, absolutely. There's like a regular feeling of dissonance in these songs, both within them and the ways in which they kind of sit in relation to each other, that is kind of affronting. And I can't deny it kind of goes against the grain of what you would expect from a kind of typical flowing record. I do think that these songs fit together for the most part, but it's like, instead of flowing through each other, they're kind of brushing antagonistically, as you say, against one another. And so this record leans, I would say, heavier into some of the kind of more industrial electronic elements that kind of peppered parts of Kid A, moves further away, I would say moves much further away from even the remotest framework of Radiohead's previous material. Like, even Kid A had moments where you had like, okay, recognizable guitar, okay, like recognizable rock structure. But I think almost universally, with maybe one or two slight exceptions, every song on Kid A, it feels really unusual for Radiohead and really kind of like unprecedented. And kind of like they're moving further and further away from any kind of distinct trapping down of their aesthetic and of their musical identity. It very much feels like they're reaching into the kind of deepest, darkest depths of the mindset that they were in, that I talked about extensively leading into Kid A. It feels like the kind of twisted ghost in the machine, other side of that atmosphere.
You present a very good point, Tyler, and I know I was the first one to bring up the fact that we should separate this from Kid A as much as possible, but the only way in which I really connect these is, you just said that it serves as like a ghost in the machine for that mindset. And I think that's really interesting, because if I get all big brain galaxy Jake shit on these albums, the conceptual unifier for me is that Kid A is an album, like Kid A and Amnesiac, to me anyway, are albums that coexist in the same world, but they are being told to you from two different perspectives. From Kid A, it feels like from the perspective of someone who has removed themselves from the world and sees it in a more omniscient way, whereas Amnesiac to me is something that it takes place from someone inside the head of someone who exists within it and is trapped by it. And that's not to compare it, like that's just like how I like view it. And I think the frustrating thing is, if I can loop back around to Morgan's point, just to like set the framework for the rest of the songs here, is that my problem with Amnesiac is, I guess, I hope Morgan can at least understand what I'm saying here, is that I've been trying to articulate what it is about this album that works and doesn't for me, is that you kind of alluded to this being a stranger, darker, and also just more like, it's just got something about it that's just different. And for me, the problem is that I don't know where this album is just unconventional and different begins, and where I think this album needs to do a couple of things better to be the best version of itself ends. Like these two ideas clash for me on here, and not getting into any of the songs is that I'm just never entirely sure. It's like, is it my fault I'm not getting into this, or is it really that the record is not its whole self? Like, should I draw the criticism there?
Yeah, I would say that for me, there's not a song that I don't get into, but this is a much more almost like chippy record. So it is, for me, I find it harder to really have a real strong emotional fall in love moment with them, because I always feel like the song a little bit wants to punch me in the face.
Yeah.
If I say the wrong thing to it.
That's a really good way of describing it.
Yeah, I agree.
Like I talked about it last week a little bit, the tour documentary from OK Computer that led into these recording sessions, right? And of course, the emotional tone of that is very Kid A. It's very like the monotony creates like a drone that removes you from the world. At the same time, you read any interview with the band that is tired of touring. In fact, you can get this a little bit with the last Train record. So he quotes a Rolling Stone interview with the band on that episode that captures this really well, which is feeling of basically like you can either be really depressed, but when you are forced to be there in front of someone, you kind of resent having to be there. And it comes through.
I'm gonna say something potentially risky here because it could potentially be misread, but or like seen as a kind of like damning with faint praise. But like the appeal of Amnesiac to me, or like the whole thing about Amnesiac, is that I don't think it's flawed necessarily, in the sense that I think this record is exactly what it wants to be. And I think it's structured and designed in this way to deliberately be affronting and to deliberately feel not right. And it's hard for me to articulate why I think that is a successful artistic expression for Radiohead rather than a failure of one. And ultimately what I'm saying is basically that this is a record that is fundamentally flawed in terms of like, and analyzing it in relation to an established framework for what like good album construction is. Like it is fundamentally pieced together in a way that is meant to kind of leave you feeling really cold and discombobulated and disoriented by it. But ultimately, like if these songs were kind of like put together or rearranged, or if some songs were taken out, or if it was constructed in a way to remove that element of it, the effect of this album I think would be lost. Like the appeal, the enjoyment that I get out of it, which is just this real kind of claustrophobic terror that it presents to me, this real kind of like nightmarish sense of like it really is like it really feels like being locked inside of a nightmare, in the sense that there's the surrealistic element to the way that it progresses, the sense of like it moves through these different kind of musical corridors, and some are adjacent to the ones that precede them, and some are like these really rough and strange and weird left turns, and that sense that this record gives you while you're immersed within it, that sense of like total just alienation and real sort of affronted kind of terror, for lack of a better word, is a big part of the experiential richness of Amnesiac, I think. And I realize that is a very kind of, a tangential or like unusual way of praising a record, and potentially I make the risk of looking ridiculous in saying that, but to me it's a very specific thing that Amnesiac gets so right.
And the thing is, for me, is that I agree with you pretty much 100%. I just, I don't know. I guess I think this is a great way of showing how me and Tyler sort of review albums, even.
Morgan's about to say exactly what I feel.
Is because, like, we're talking about the same thing here. We're having pretty much the same emotional reaction to it. And Tyler's perspective, and this will be shown in the ratings even.
Yes.
Is that Tyler is talking about this and coming away from that experience like, oh, this is really unique, and like it gives me something that I can't get anywhere else, and like I take away positive stuff from that, and then I think, yeah, it's really unique, and I can't get it anywhere else, and it still feels like it's hobbling itself. It still feels like it could be more.
Well, August, I'm curious to hear where you fit on this kind of like broad spectrum of feeling.
Yeah,
because you've
definitely.
had this record in your life for less time than both of us. I'm sure that is taken into account. But like, what was your experience like discovering this album this week and listening to it?
Well, I guess my experience was almost one of unsatisfaction, I'd say, because I distinctly remember listening to this album multiple times, and I listened to this as much as I listened to Kid A and OK Computer, both of records I obviously have put a lot of time into to get my detailed thoughts. And listening to this, I I kept listening to it and listening to it, and as my kind of general broad scope thoughts on it are, it feels almost like it's missing something. It feels almost unsatisfying or unfinished in a way. And it's not a feeling it's kind of a weird feeling where I think I'm almost in line with kind of Jake and Morgan in a sense on their feelings towards this record, I'd say. And
That's
I
hardly a surprise, and I'm kind of glad, just because it makes me feel a little bit of solidarity, because this is a weird album to talk about.
and yeah, I mean, obviously I'm not going to go too terribly in depth right now, but I'm sure as we get further into this review, I'll be able to explain that a bit more, that feeling. Yeah.
No, absolutely. No, fair enough. And that's, I think, if it is any consolation, August, I think that is the general effect and general sort of consensus on this record is that there is a vocal minority of people who I say are like really super like vocal about this record, and like loving it. But I do think that is what it is, a minority, and most people do have that kind of unified reaction to Amnesiac. And again, I think it's one of those things where it's just dark. It's just really kind of, its jankiness is by design, and I can't really sort of necessarily sort of defend that, except insofar as it creates this very unique and insular experience that's kind of akin to listening to like a real sort of avant-garde or musique concrète or like really sort of esoteric electronic record. But what makes Amnesiac interesting, beyond that general feeling, is the variety of instrumentation and experimentation that's on display on this record as well, which doesn't, experimentation, instrumental variants in a new way doesn't inherently make the music good, but it does show, I think, Radiohead continuing to explore and see what the possibilities of their kind of musical identity could be. And Amnesiac is a beautiful example, I think, of a record that is absolutely not designed to be anyone's favorite. Is designed to fill out a specific niche and satisfy a specific kind of creative drive that I see as organically evolving out of the creation of Kid A, like being this kind of like pent up, just general kind of like aggression and insular ugliness that is really the kind of underside, underbelly of the frequent, astonishing beauty of Kid A. Like, that is a beautiful record, I think. Even in its darkest moments, it just has this austere beauty to it. Whereas Amnesiac is kind of like completely the inverse. There's really only one song here that I would say has a kind of conventional beauty to it. And I think it's probably the song that is the best place to start talking about this record. And that is the
Pyramid
song
Song?
Pyramid Song,
Yep.
which is, what generally regarded as a huge fan favorite. This very sweeping ballad that has this sort of off-putting kind of progression that famously, like the famous thing about Pyramid Song is that everyone's like, Radiohead fans love to point out to you that the song is in 4/4 because it has this sort of swaying sensibility to it where it feels like it's off in an odd time signature, but it's just like a progression that is very regular once you kind of get your head around it. And it's a good example of how Radiohead will take a really kind of simple musical template and just present it in an unusual way that kind of off-foots you. They do it very successfully on the song Videotape on In Rainbows as well, which we'll get to in a few weeks.
Yeah. I feel like these two songs are like inextricably linked in my head.
Yeah, and we'll leave that there because it's not fair to talk about Videotape. We can come back to that comparison when we talk about In Rainbows. But Pyramid Song is this kind of like woozy sort of very ethereal, piano-led ballad. Tom is singing about kind of being carried away, floating sort of down a river and seeing sort of black-eyed angels, and it's this very sort of like ethereal ascendant song. And to me, like, it is a great song. I'd be very curious to hear what you all think about this song. I think it's a great song, but it's almost like it doesn't fit on this album.
Yeah, I completely agree with that assessment. I think that this is pretty head and shoulders my favorite song on the album, and it also perfectly embodies how I feel about the album as a whole, in that it's just this mood that it creates is like, I even feel in a sense that it sort of has kind of an anticlimax that I feel like some people like you get from Kid A from Amnesiac that lets you enjoy it more. But and it achieves that here. It's just that this is the only time on the record where it hits that height and simultaneously hits that height and hits that kind of weird sort of limbo that it puts you in of not being this traditional kind of record or even a Radiohead record, but it also just, it doesn't quite it achieves its goals, but it still leaves you kind of wanting more in a sense. And I feel like that's what Amnesiac is supposed to be. And my problem with it is that not only does it kind of sound different than lots of the stuff here, is that it's the only song that really, I feel, that gets, maybe not the only, but at least one of the very few that truly gets it. And I'm like, I don't want an album full of Pyramid songs, but I want an album full of songs that do what Pyramid Song does. And it's really frustrating that I don't get that. And I know it's easy to compare. It's like, oh, why don't you have a fucking the Bends? Why can't every song be Street Spirit? And it's like, I get that, but it's like, it's purely in form that I appreciate this and a lot of the things on the album. Never, ever as function. And that's so frustrating for me because, yeah, it can have this sort of weird, unwieldy ephemeralness, and it doesn't necessarily have to be as conceptual as the past few records to be able to succeed. It's just that those records, I still just like, it's not even that they are conceptual. It's just that they fulfill their goals better than this album does. And on this song specifically too.
See, I think, Jake, you and I both agree that this song doesn't fit on this album, but we almost have the opposite kind of expansions on that.
I was just thinking the same thing.
I mean, that is this album, is that we feel the same way about it, like in an assessment way, but on an emotional way, it's completely different.
I think this is a great song, but also, like, I think that this record would be better if it weren't on it, because it kind of sets up this expectation for the record, and maybe that is part of that. I've presented a defense for this record that I'm going to go into. Like, I think from the round about the third track onwards, this kind of album really hits a streak that I love. But I think this album kind of presents a certain subversion that with the opening track, which is this kind of really sort of cold. It opens with this kind of banging a wooden spoon on a pot percussive loop, which is really like a strange way to open an album, and it kind of leads you into this synthetic world. It's not, the opener is not one of my favorite songs here, but I do think it sets the mood in a suitable way. But the Pyramid song comes in, and it's everything I said. It's lush, it's gorgeous, it's heartbreaking. It is an S tier Radiohead song, but it does not gel with the rest of the atmosphere of this record. And I almost feel like, this is not me projecting an alternative opinion onto any of you, but I almost feel like some people might respond to this record more, or might find it easier to get on this record's wavelength if it weren't doing things like that, where it's almost like teasing you with what it isn't going to be. That's my biggest complaint about this album, which is a weird thing to complain about the song Pyramid song being on this record.
Yeah.
I mean,
kind of where I'm at.
Something the more, and again, I don't want to project opinions, but something Morgan said, which is it feels like the album is like hobbling itself by being the thing it's being, in a way. Like I have shared similar sentiments, but I feel like in a way, if like Pyramid song wasn't on this album, and I understand why they put it here, because some of the sonic directions that distinguish it from Kid A, this song shares. But that being said, if this song wasn't on it, I feel like it would be a much more almost like unified vision of Paranoia.
I feel like perhaps there's just an intention to the song, a feeling to the song that I just haven't quite like glommed onto yet in terms of its relation to the other tracks on this record, potentially. But August, I'm curious to hear what you think of this song.
Well, I mean, it's a rather good song. I think it's got a lot of the emotionality to it that I think, and I think that's almost why I find it doesn't fit, is that it's very outwardly dour in its emotions rather than like aggressive and anxious and confrontational like a lot of the rest of this, where this is just a track that makes you want to jump off a bridge. I love the strange rhythmic pattern here, but I also do have to completely agree with the points that it just doesn't really find a place in the album. And as the second track, I think that makes it stick out even more, because it isn't really like, it almost isn't built upon in a way by the songs that come after it. It feels more like it was very incidental to its placement in the album, is how I kind of feel about it.
Yeah, definitely.
And my perspective on it is like, and this goes back to the idea that it's sort of like it feels more like a compilation album to me, is that like, does anything fit on here? Like,
yeah,
I don't know. And I think that's part of the appeal, but also it seems strange to me to harp on a Pyramid song, not like harp on it, but like focus in on it as a sort of outlier on the album, when the album is so deliberately all over the damn shop.
My perspective on that is that there's a lot of musical variation between songs in terms of the approach taken to execute the points of the songs, but to me, for most of the rest of the record, the feeling is unified between the songs. Like just about every song on this record, except for Pyramid song, to me gives off a very similar feeling that kind of August touched on briefly with that description of kind of an aggressive, obtuse sort of anxiety. That's not foreign for Radiohead, absolutely. But to me, that's what unifies this record. Is that it's really like if Kid A is sort of like this, experiential wondrous trip through this kind of out of body experience, then Amnesiac is like consistently crushing you under its weight. Like it's consistently putting you inside this like packed like sardines in a crushed tin box, even like that opening track. It's consistently putting you in this space where you're feeling like constantly assaulted and constricted and confined and like burst and like kind of just writhing to be free of that, and that I think is the unifier. Maybe that's too abstract, but to me, like I do think most of this record is unified. It's just it doesn't quite always. It feels like before it unifies itself, it deliberately tries to kind of wrong foot you, and that disrupts the album experience a little bit for me.
I think that that's sort of like just super telling as to how you're going to feel about it, because at some point it's just like, this is definitely one of those albums that at the end of the day you just kind of have to throw your cards on the table and be like, this is either just going to work for you or it is not. Like, it could grow on you, sure, it has on me a little bit. Like, I'm going to talk very negatively about this album, but like, I need to everyone to understand that on like a core level, like, the musicianship is good, the writing is good, from every like fundamental level. Like, this is a good album. Like, there are very few points on it where I would say that this is like subpar, or Radiohead just isn't like hitting the stride they want to. But the problem is, the album seems to be so focused on what it isn't that it doesn't ever really decide what it is. Like, it's doing all these things and like, oh, it's this subverting that. Thank you. It's subverting all these things and doing all these things, and it's just like, okay, you keep telling me what this isn't and never what it is. And then some people are going to come and say, it's just like, oh, well, that's kind of the point, that it's disorienting. And I'm just like, but I feel like this could be disorienting in a way where it doesn't sacrifice that. And I'm like, damn it, be better, damn you.
And I think part of the problem, at least on my end, is that at least twice after this album, Radiohead took a really quite similar approach.
Yes, that too.
Hail to the Thief kind of is similar in the way that it's just all over the damn shop. And A Moon-Shaped Pool, I think, is really similar in its approach.
So is In Rainbows.
But certainly not in atmosphere or emotional reaction, at least for much of its runtime.
I think more in like a sonic, like pure sound direction of something that's like, it's so like disparate, but like, it, to me, In Rainbows does what Tyler says that Amnesiac does. It's not about the mood being achieved being similar. It's using all of these disparate parts to create the same mood, which I think In Rainbows does well. I just don't think Amnesiac does it as well.
Right, and I don't want to harp on like future releases, but it does need to be said that if I'm going to talk about this album in any way, I'm like, there are two albums that come after it that I think take a similar approach and are much more successful.
Yeah, agree.
See, I completely disagree. I don't think there's a single other record in the Radiohead catalog that remotely approaches album construction in the way this does. Yeah, there's albums that have like a dark, dour, oppressive mood. I would definitely agree with that extent that Amnesiac isn't the only album that kind of lingers in that. But there is no other Radiohead album that takes it as far as this one does and has such a sort of avant-garde or just like confronting approach to it. Like, Radiohead always consistently lean back on the kind of beauty element of their music, the kind of like transcendental joy that their music can bring, with a kind of like, if not joy, then just the sort of like out of body sort of like, that Radiohead feeling that so many fans describe. And it's almost like, with the exception of Pyramid Song, and I'm not going to talk about on that anymore because we've already talked about how that does or does not fit. With the exception of that, this record consistently avoids that 100% of the time. Like, it is never, ever leaning into that element of that, what people love about Radiohead. And again, avoiding that is not inherent praise of the album. It's like, it's almost like the album is daring you to respond negatively to it. And it does not surprise me in the slightest that certain people here would respond to that kind of dare by saying, fuck you, it's a bad album, or fuck you, it is, all of these things in a negative way. But there's just like something about the consistently oppressive atmosphere of this record. I can't get it anywhere else. And I find it weirdly intoxicating, especially once you get to Polk Pull Revolving Doors, which is where it's not the moment where the record finds its identity. I think I would say that's not really until around about I Might Be Wrong and Knives Out, which is where the record really hits a stride to me. But Polk Pull Revolving Doors, and I guess maybe in a sense Pyramid Song's situation on this record is kind of partly to, intensify the effect of this track, which I don't think it needs to be there to do that, because this track is so disorienting in and of itself, and so like, what the fuck is this relative to everything else Radiohead have ever done. But when this track comes in, and I see a lot of talking shit on this track, or just not acknowledging it at all, which is really interesting and weird to me. Because it, to
I'll
me,
get on your
like,
wavelength there. That's stupid.
to me, like pull revolving doors is like it's actually not really that often from this point onwards where you see Radiohead like really being like visibly experimental in ways that feel like confronting and shocking. But this is one of them, and it's an absolutely bizarre and strange track that feels very much like at the core of what Amnesiac is as an album and the effect it intends to have. This really sort of intense, sort of static laden jungle loop that's very, very, say it with me, kids, Outtakes influenced. It's just right there in the stereo system, and then the warped vocals that are distorted to sound almost like a childish AI, like this really kind of like, it's just so unsettling. And with these repetitive like cut up refrains about trapdoors, you really feel like you're being kind of chewed up when you listen to this, and it's very, very, very like strange. And I've come to really, really appreciate the effect that this song has, and especially the way in which I feel like it is just one shade of many of these different kind of like nightmarish atmospheres that this record kind of like throws you into, that feel unified by that feeling that it gives off.
And like I just before we get onto that, I have to, you kind of went into pull while like not leaving me necessarily to address your opposition to our previous points, which and like is that I don't disagree with anything you said.
Yes, thank you. I was putting a pin in that as well.
It's very intoxicating and frequently sort of disorienting, and it's very good at that, but that's also limited on this album in particular, is that I can never, and I can't explain why, which is so goddamn frustrating. Fuck you, Amnesiac. Is that like I can't articulate why it feels like it should be more, but it feels like it should be. And I think for one thing, a more sonic unification to go along with the atmospheric and emotional unification would go some lengths to that. I think more songs that sound like pull would, obviously this would make this album even more divisive, but I would also like it more because it's sort of embracing one thing and variations on that, kind of like, the albums before it did, which, it can't, that's another thing that's really frustrating about this, is that it never can escape the shadow of Kid A in a way that I really hate about it. Which makes me
theory,
think,
it's so easy to divorce yourself from it, but then you listen to it and you're like, god damn it.
And then sometimes to the fault of the record itself, Morning Bell, is it's fucking like I part of me wishes that they took another year or maybe 2 years to develop this, and I don't necessarily know what that means, because this sounds developed on a song by song individual track basis, but as an album it doesn't, which makes me feel like a fool for saying, because what the hell does that even mean?
I think what it is, Morgan, is just that this record has a very clear idea of what it wants to do. Or I give Radiohead the credit that I believe that they executed the vision that they wanted, but the whole nature of it is so like confronting and so situated as an opposition to the previous record that almost its very nature, it's like it's intended to not gel with some people who get whose enjoyment of Radiohead is based in a certain aspect of what they do. And so it's like I
have to harp, it doesn't not gel, it just needs to gel more. And like I need that clarified.
I think the objection like that Tyler made was to when like in regards specifically to construction, and to be entirely fair to the point that we were making, I don't think Morgan and I were talking about construction or even structure. We were talking about sound, like the pure raw aesthetic of it, and not exactly how it's put together. And I think the disagreement and the divisiveness on the record, which is really funny because I know for a fact that our scores are not that far apart, but the divisiveness here, I think, is that Tyler said just now, I think that, Radiohead executed the vision that they want to do. In my opinion, I don't think they quite pulled it off. I think that the vision that they wanted to do is not exactly quite there. And that's where I think this comes from, is the divisiveness of, like, we pretty much agree on, like, every quantitative assessment on this record. It's just how successfully did they achieve it? And that's so ephemeral and personal. And it's just like, like, okay.
Tyler's perspective is that they hit the mark. Jake's perspective is that they didn't quite get there. And I think my perspective is I don't know what the hell the mark is. Which, again, is, say it with me, kids, is part of the appeal.
Yeah.
Like,
Saoirse,
it's just,
we've kind of come, Morgan and me and Jake are kind of like opposing, I guess, in the way we experience this album. I'm curious where you come at it from, because I'm not really I don't really know how you feel specifically, and I'm curious if maybe where you align or if you feel differently.
I mean, I'll level with you guys. Aside from the Morning Bell thing, there is not really a point on at least my last couple of listens to this record where I thought of Kid A once. I managed to have that divorced experience with it. And I have a really strong affection to it. I've already noted the ways in which I don't love it, but my real strong affection for it comes from that experience. And I think there is a validity to the idea that maybe every song is really well formed, but maybe its sort of unified vision isn't quite as grand as maybe it could be. But then again, that is sort of the appeal of the record, and that it's more sitting in the corner doing the expression on the cover. Feel about it.
To sort of put this in the ground and even kind of put a pin in it just so we can move on and even hear from August a little bit more, because I'm sure he has something to say at this point. But like, I feel like Morgan and I I feel like Morgan and I are coming at this from the same perspective, in the sense that our opinion is insanely difficult to articulate, not because this is a difficult album to talk about, which it is, but because our position inherently makes us sound stupid. Like, trying to tell you why this doesn't work for us makes us sound... Okay,
my position makes me sound stupid, because I'm saying this record is flawed, therefore it's good, is basically the tenet of my thing.
and
it's just a very nuanced,
we don't get it, and that's why it's bad. So it's just like everyone sounds like an idiot when they try to put why they feel this way.
It's just a very nuanced difference of perspective. And like, there's that quote that like really makes me think a lot, which is something like, talking about music is like dancing about architecture. It's like, it at the end of the day, whether or not this album really works for you,
perfect example.
You might just not, you just might not vibe with it at the end of the day, to the level of other people.
Well, I think we've kind of talked that point in circles by now. But
it is important to say, though. I mean,
it is important to make clear, because you're right that there is like a sense in which we kind of agree and disagree, and the distinctions between how we experience this record are really kind of weird. But yeah, August, you've kind of spoken a little bit on the fact that you find this record kind of unsatisfying. I wonder if you could speak a little bit more on like how you feel about the way these kind of tracks come together or don't come together, and even if you want to start making reference to examples on the record and maybe lead us into.
I have more faith in August to articulate my opinion than I do myself, frankly.
Well, I find that very flattering, but I don't know if I can do that for you. But the way I guess I find this album unsatisfying, in a sense, is that when I'm listening to it, I feel there's a lot of ideas on here that don't really coalesce or go anywhere I find terribly interesting or adventurous. And when they get going somewhere, it is almost universally a letdown for me. Let's go with the track You and Whose Army. I really love the distinct mournfulness in the first half of this song. I love the really ethereal, weird washes of sound over this song. And it feels like it's building and building to somewhere interesting. And then they just tack a Karma Police interpolation onto the end of it. And it's, what? What the hell was that? And that kind of sums up a lot of how the record feels to me, where it'll either go somewhere that I couldn't expect because it doesn't seem like a logical or satisfying or interesting conclusion to a particular track, or I just feel a song will meander in one repetitive kind of uninteresting groove for a long time. And when that's 6 songs out of 11, I can't call the record something I'm particularly excited to listen to, because I just feel frustrated by it more so than I feel satisfied or complete by the ideas presented on here.
That's reaffirming.
Well, okay, let's try and we've definitely come at this really honing in on the points at which we vary, and maybe we won't ever be able to completely agree on something, but let's try and see if we can kind of unify around some of the things that we like about this record then. What are some of the things that you guys think this record succeeds at doing, if anything?
Ending before the 45-minute mark.
That, Christ. First of all, Tom York found dead.
That's a joke. That's a joke. But
August just I think this gets a lower rating than Pablo Honey. Fuck y'all.
Boom. But I do stand by my interjection.
The real Amnesiac is me trying to forget August's rating for this album.
I do stand by my interjection of saying that the record does achieve an atmosphere on asterisk almost every song that is, while maybe it's not consistent, maybe it doesn't all flow together for you, I still find it to be a very evocatively dark record, as Tyler was talking about. Like, there is a consistent overall that sort of, like, I hinted at this sounding like it's the more oppressive, like taking place from inside the mind of someone who is embedded in the world of Kid A. And I stand by that, because I think like those first 6 songs, there's like which I mean, this is sort of a half compliment, half that I really like the first half of the record, and then it kind of falls off a little bit for me. But the first half of the record is so like interior. It's so like it's disparate, but I feel like it gets the closest to evoking that kind of consistency that I want from it, while still maintaining a sense of disparity. And I think that there's some of these that like just some of the vocal deliveries from Tom very specifically, he changes it up a lot on this album in terms of how he delivers everything, like in terms of the tenor, in terms of like the frailty of his voice, or even how it's like slathered in effects sometimes, like on Polk Revolving Doors, where it's almost just integrated into being like pure sound play. And on stuff like You and Whose Army, I find the sort of repetition of that to be pretty effective, all things considered. And I like how this is like the jazziest Radiohead album. It's just kind of got this sort of dark ambient jazz lounge thing about it, where I'm like, if this was a little bit more, if Morgan said like, if this was like a let cook a little while longer, I really feel like that identity, it could really make something out of. And it does achieve it for the most part, but I wanted to do it a little bit more. But I do, generally speaking, like how this album sounds like on a moment to moment basis. It's consistently like, this is a good crop of songs from Radiohead, bare minimum.
You've touched on an interesting, and kind of August has as well, an interesting element of this record that kind of contributes to the vibe that it has, that is also, I think, maybe part of the reason why it lands for some people and doesn't land for other people. And that's the notion of repetition, like within these songs.
Definitely.
Like, this is almost Radiohead becoming a jam band at certain points. Like I would highlight a song like Dollars and Cents, for instance, which is this kind of like really kind of grandiose, very kind of like rhythm, groove heavy. And I've talked a lot about how with each album, Radiohead become more and more focused on groove. Like that's the heart of their interest in electronic music, right? And what Tom said about being uninterested in melody when going into Kid A and much more interested in rhythm. And that feels like it takes real center stage on Amnesiac as well. And so yeah, and I can see why that would be kind of frustrating and kind of like aloof. But again, for me, that's part of the effect of like immersing you within these kind of weird ambient soundscapes that these songs kind of conjure, these kind of hellish circles of hell. Like when I listen to Dollars and Cents, I feel like I am in this gigantic, cavernous hellscape, basically, and everything around me is burning. And I get a similar atmosphere when I listen to a song like, Pull Revolving Doors, which is kind of much more, just confined and ugly. And also like one of my favorite Radiohead B-sides ever, Cut Tooth, as well, as like the jam band version of Radiohead at its most kind of refined and grandiose, like with the booming pianos on that song. And so there's that aspect of Amnesiac that I really like, is the kind of jammy nature of it. And that manifests in some weird curio ways as well, like the Morning Bell Amnesiac version, which, I understand the dislike that track gets. It's certainly one of my lower ranked ones on this record, but I don't feel that it deviates from the MO of this album or it kind of like shoots it in the foot. It has the same sort of like real kind of demented, warped feeling to it. And I feel like perhaps there has to be a reason why they specifically decided to execute this musical idea within the realm of the Morning Bell song rather than just applying it to a new song. And I don't quite know what that is, which is why I don't love this song. But I do love, like, taking the Morning Bell aspect of it taken apart. I love the real sort of like haunted carnival-esque feel that the instrumental on this track has, and also the way that it resolves into this kind of like major key conclusion that still feels like really unsettling, even though it should be this like beautiful resolution. It's like one of the moments on the record where it gets closest to like that Radiohead beauty that they get when they find these really kind of gorgeous chords, except when Morning Bell Amnesiac resolves onto that chord, it feels wrong. It feels really it feels like, it gives me the heebie-jeebies in a way that I appreciate, even if, that's really the highlight of the song. And you have a song like I Might Be Wrong, which is very jammy and very kind of like bluesy. Like if you see them play this live, they really turn up the bluesy element of it and the guitar playing. And there's a great story behind how Tom York wrote this song, which was that he was like in a beach house, and he kind of at nighttime, and he walked out onto the beach and he looked back into the house and he saw a light come on even though no one was in the house. And he basically had this kind of like really ghostly experience where he felt like he was being watched. He felt like someone was there hiding, observing him. And that's kind of tapping into a feeling of paranoia that is very Tom York, right? That he writes about a lot. And what I love about I Might Be Wrong is the way that, I mean, even if you don't know that backstory, this is a song that is just suffused with that feeling of paranoia, that feeling of just eerie chill that the song has. And I love that aspect of that track. I think it's really, really awesome and well executed. And to me, like, that is a big part of the appeal of a lot of these songs that are more formless, that are less kind of like sharpened up, is just that they throw you into this really disorienting atmosphere. They suspend you in it, and you kind of just sort of simmer in it. And it's very, 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 I think if Radiohead had other albums like this, this album would kind of not be interesting at all. I think what makes this interesting to me is the fact that it's so unlike anything else Radiohead ever done. And it feels like the kind of this extreme version of this aspect of their sound taken to its like weirdest. And yeah, the results definitely vary, but when it nails that atmosphere like it does on some of those songs towards the center of the record, like I Might Be Wrong and Dollars and Cents, like that is a really enriching vibe that this album often has for me.
Yeah, I could totally co-sign pretty much everything about I Might Be Wrong. That's definite highlight of the album for me, and like it's probably top 30 Radiohead songs in general. shit just fucking, it goes.
It's interesting as a place on the album in that not a lot of the tracks on this record are guitar driven, but they show up here, but they are in this way that sounds completely divorced from how Radiohead have used the instrument before, even on Kid A, right? Just the tops are fucking gone. It's very compressed, and it just lets the mood of that sit with you.
Yeah, and you kind of get the inverse of that on a song like Dollars and Cents too, where the guitars are kind of there in the back, but they're like really just like atonal and strange. And so I like the way that Radiohead uses guitars in an unusual way when they pop up on this record. And that I guess is as good a point as any to start talking about another absolute highlight of this album to me that I could see being divisive, which is the song Knives Out at the center of this record, which it was one of the singles for the album, I'm pretty sure. And has a Spike Jonze directed music video, which is incredibly upsetting, as you would expect a music video for a song on this album to be. And this is a song that is essentially about like consumption, but with a specifically kind of cannibalistic bent to the lyrics. It feels like there's a really kind of hopeless tone to it. I'm very curious what you guys think of this song.
Knives Out. I think this is definitely a record highlight. I really do like the really spiteful, bitter feeling on this track. I think it's something the band hasn't quite dabbled with in an emotional context quite like they do on this song. I think the imagery of cannibalism kind of contributes to, I mean, I think it's a song that's obviously not directly, it's not a song about cannibalism. It features that imagery, but what it's about, I think, is, at least the way I take it, is more about kind of almost familiarity from contempt is how I read it, or contempt from familiarity, sorry, other way around. And just living and breathing someone else's air for so long, it almost feels like an antithesis to a lot of other songs they've written of feeling a dependency and a need for someone else in your life, where here it's you've had too much of someone and you could literally tear them apart and eat them up after every little mistake, which just becomes more and more apparent to you as time has passed by.
Yeah.
So
in a lot of ways, it feels very much akin emotionally to a song like the original Morning Bell off of the last record, which is this song about like being, ostensibly being this, feeling this immense distance from other people, from people in your life. And it manifests in this really surreal way in that song where you get lyrics like cut the kid in half, where it's like very kind of like horrific imagery at certain points. Knives Out, I totally agree, August, taps into a similar feeling. And maybe that's part of the rationale behind having the Morning Bell sequel kind of succeeding it as a kind of epilogue, but I can't really dig into that. I just think Knives Out is a fantastic song, both in those kind of atmospheric, the feelings it gives off and the lyricism, but also just the actual sound of the song as well. Those kind of like arpeggiated chords and the just like insistent guitar that strums these really kind of like just upsetting chords. Like, this is the thing about this record, is that it finds this consistently on all the songs, whether they work for you or not. The band managed to find these kind of like these chords or these sounds that just sound so wrong, and Knives Out kind of festers in that, and it never really concludes in a way that feels conclusive. It just feels like it's just constantly piling downward, if that makes any sense. It's very upsetting to listen to. It feels like that's a thing we say at some point in every video here. There's a song on one of these albums that is just genuinely upsetting. And I think Knives Out is the kind of nadir of the album in that regard, in terms of just being really fucking genuinely unpleasant. And it says a lot that they released it as a single, I think. Not just because like, it has this kind of ostensibly, it feels weird to say relatively conventional setup with the structure of it, but the whole atmosphere of it is just like, it feels very much like, this is the taste of the record we want to give you, because this is, what we want to, essentially the feeling that this record is going to give off. And another particular highlight, and I want to touch back into actually no, fuck that. I just moved over, plowed through. And does anyone else want to talk about Knives Out?
It's this dope ass song. I'm in a similar position to Pyramid Song in regards to this record, although I think this is much more atmospherically in keeping with the rest of the album than Pyramid Song is, where it's just like my emotional reaction is like, this is great, but what the hell is it doing here? And you know, that's neat. That's fine. Cool. Great song. Can't complain too much.
Yeah, I love it. It make me feel spooky, like I'm in like a haunted house and I'm looking around corners, and I love it. And those are my thoughts on the song. It's great. Full stop.
Okay, cool. So I
We're
want
not
to
talking about that record yet, Saoirse. I'm gonna kill myself on camera.
I don't even know what you're referencing.
Full stop.
Oh.
What?
August just like,
Just-
what are you fucking talking about?
Well, and now for something completely different.
Anyway,
yeah, cut that bit.
Uh-huh.
Knives Out in the editing room. I want to jump at this point to another sort of standout for this record for me in terms of a song that really accentuates the vibe of the album while doing something completely musically unique and also just being quite moving as well. I talked about with Pull Revolving Doors, which is also a highlight, how Radiohead bring back the kind of sense of distortion and like contorted nature to the vocals to make it seem kind of unearthly. And they do that even more effectively on my absolute favorite song on this album, Like Spinning Plates, which I think is one of the most just profoundly emotional Radiohead songs for me anyway. I can't speak to anyone else's experience with this song. It is really just so upsetting and just like really moving and emotional as well. It's the kind of like this reversed poetic lashing out at genocidal figures of power, which is also a theme that ties back to a song like You and Whose Army as well. It has one of my favorite lyrical passages of any Radiohead song. While you make pretty speeches, I'm being cut to shreds. You feed me to the lions, a delicate balance. It's almost as though the terror and the ugliness of these lines are too much for Tom to bear, because he sings them in reverse, which is then itself reversed to become legible but distorted, Twin Peaks style. Yeah, I mean, maybe this song falls completely flat for some people because it is very minimal and it's very focused on that warped beat and these kind of like gentle kind of melodic, almost like distorted mellotron bits that kind of come through that accentuate it. But it has a very kind of similar effect to me as a song like Idiotic on Kid A, even though the approach is quite different and it's much slower and more morose. I'm curious what you will think of this song.
Yeah, that shit hits. That's some good fucking. I mean, not. Well, maybe it is just because of the fucking backwards vocals, and I'm so fucking lynch pilled at this point. But it does feel like it makes you feel like you're in the red room, the black lodge, fucking. You know what I'm talking about.
I do know what you're talking about.
Fully lost my mind.
That's fine.
Yeah, good song. Hurts.
For a minute there, you lost yourself.
I hope you stub your toe.
I do regularly, so
co-sign what Morgan said about the song. I think it's cool. It's probably my favorite on the back half. But as alluded to earlier, I'm sure you can fucking pile on me for this one, but it's just like, after fucking Knives Out, the album just for me just takes a dip in the ceiling of quality for me, just because I don't care for Morning Bell. I think Dollars and Cents is fine. Like Spinning Plates and Life in a Glass House are good. I just don't enjoy them nearly as much as I enjoy anything on the front half of the album, which again leaves it in a weird place for me because it's like there's plenty of songs I love on here, but also the album's kind of wonky in terms of structure already, and now it's kind of like also just more obviously kind of weird for me. So it's just kind of another way where I'm like, I like this, but like,
Yeah, I think I'd agree that after Knives Out, it's a slight dip in quality, but I will say that Life in a Glass House is, I think, a wonderful closer to the record.
It's good.
Because it's such a weird record, and then it ends with this really kind of kooky emotional palette. It's like, wow, I'm kind of almost having fun. It's weird, and I like it.
Dancing with the homies in a diner in hell.
I love
That's the Jams and Tea podcast.
I would agree that the second half is my least favorite half, but like that's also just because it has the two absolute low points of the record.
Yeah.
And not because I don't really enjoy the high points on the back half, because I do, like Spinning Plates, Life in a Glass House, I've said is my favorite here. Dollars and Cents I like quite a bit. And then there's the other two.
This song for me, I think, is interesting, mainly that when that first verse comes in, I'm like, really like, oh shit, where's this gonna go? This is so fucking cool. And it's like, oh, we're halfway through the song, and I just find myself utterly, it feels like the intro goes on for too long without doing enough, because if it was like a 30-second intro led into this, and then there was like a longer, more substantial outro to this, I feel I would have liked that choice more. But it got to it felt to me like when I was listening to this album without actively paying attention to the track list, this felt like a song that just kind of happened and didn't really feel like it was led into in a really interesting and compelling way. And that is no doubt due to the sequencing and the track it is placed directly after of. That being said, I do still really like the emotions and the political aspects this song conjures. And really that's an aspect I think I want to touch on about this album in general, is I think the political commentary, particularly on this song and Life in a Glass House, are very sharp, predictive, and Dollars and Cents even are very sharp, predictive songs that really show the band's talent for songwriting and expand upon a lot of ideas alluded to at previous points in their career, like on OK Computer and Kid A, without ever feeling redundant, or like I could just listen to this in another song. And that's also where the frustration of this record comes in, because we've got these three amazing songs in the back half surrounded by bullshit, but that's how I fall on this song.
But yeah, like Spinning Plates, I guess I can understand how it could kind of just leave a bit of a blank, impact. But to me, the lyrical sharpness, as you spoke of, combined with just the texture of the sounds in the song, the ways in which those kind of warped loops kind of start to get like this kind of whistly quality to them as they progress, and they kind of decay. It's very just so, I guess I'm just describing it, and I'm not really explaining why I like it, but there's just a feeling as the song develops of this kind of emotional intensifying that I think is partly also due to the increased emotional presence of the vocal performance as the song goes on. And I it's quite startling every time I listen to it, when those reversed vocals change to forward vocals and you have Tom just kind of like, really emoting straight away. It's quite a profound moment, I'll say it. And then Life in a Glass House, I think, is a great closer, and maybe a good point to kind of wrap up this discussion of the album proper, to talk about the impact of this closer, because again, it's another example of a Radiohead left turn, right? It is, we had the kind of the prominence of the kind of brass horn instrumentation on a song like the National Anthem and Kid A, but it's like that musical template is used completely differently in a song like Life in a Glass House, which is recorded with a completely different section, and has this kind of prominence of woodwinds in it as well, and this real theme of kind of surveillance and monitoring, and this idea of kind of isolating yourself as a way of protecting yourself from a kind of a world that wishes to do you harm. It has this great sort of funereal thing to it. Like I believe the jazz band that they hired were instructed to play like a funeral march in a funeral march style, and a New Orleans funeral march style specifically, I believe. And it has that real sort of sense of, it's almost vaudevillian in a certain way. It has this real kind of character to it that is so unique, and but also like feels like a really neat sort of endpoint summation of this album.
I think it's worth saying that this came out 4 years before an album we've covered, Drinking Songs by Matt Elliott. Which
an album I would wager is very influenced by this album specifically.
Yeah, but that song as well, I think it captures also what we talked a little bit about Tom Waits on the Lost Record Club, with that squawking brass New Orleans funereal thing. That just feels it feels funereal, but in a way like you're being drawn into the ground by a demon. Like
it's almost like sarcastic, like it has this kind of sense of vaudevillian sort of playfulness to it, and yet it's so dark, it's so oppressive. When Tom hits that kind of like repetition of the only, and the band are just going crazy behind him, that's a really kind of just like just horrific moment, really, because it's like it's so hopeless. And that is an aspect of when Radiohead lean into that aspect of their sound. I really respond to it, because no one really captures that sort of hopelessness with as much verve and just genuine like weirdness as Radiohead does. And I think that's why Glasshouse works as a closer. It's like this kind of ironic celebration of the, it's like a dance of death, a satanic dance of death sort of thing. And it's an ironic kind of celebration of all of the shit that this record is kind of, talking about.
Best, both lyrically and atmospherically, it best embodies the best parts of this entire album. And it's just, just purely sonically, the sound of this song like massages my brain. It just, ooh, I like woodwinds.
Yeah. So I guess if no one else has anything they want to say, directly about any of the songs on this album, at this point I will, in which case obviously just interrupt me at any time. At this point, I want to. At this point, I want to kind of move the discussion forward and shift to this idea of, just as a kind of thought exercise, reflecting on the relationship between Kid A and Amnesiac. One thing that a lot of fans love to do is theorize about about an alternate reality, essentially, which is that Radiohead have said that for a time they considered releasing Kid A and Amnesiac as a double album. And I'm sure it goes without saying from me, but I'm glad they did not do that. I'm sure from all of us, because these, as we've kind of talked about, these songs have a very distinct identity to the songs on Kid A. And so I will acknowledge up front that by engaging in the quote unquote Kid Amnesiac thought experiment and encouraging everyone else to think about that, I'm being a bit of a hypocrite. But I think it's more of a case of imagining an alternative reality to these songs so as to better appreciate the reality that does exist. So I'm curious what you all think of the idea of a Kid Amnesiac, and whether that could be something that is successful as an experiment, or whether it is a kind of an impossible task.
The latter. I don't, I'm very glad they released these the way they did. And like, it feels so deliberately like this is like Amnesiac is a left turn of a left turn, that like putting them together just kind of, it does not get the people going. in my estimation. And
It-
you know,
I will
Yeah.
clarify that it's not about like sandwiching these albums together. It's about like picking songs from each and whether something different and interesting, not necessarily better, but whether something different and interesting could be achieved by doing that.
I don't know. I've lived with these albums way too long to get on board with any of that. Like I
Well,
I don't know who's fucking it's the playlist of it's somebody's playlist of Stephen Hyden's, yeah, duh, that you
Yeah.
sent. And like I just, I tried that and it felt icky. I felt icky.
Well, the way I see it is like Kid A, as I've expressed previously on this podcast, is to me such a perfectly formed thing. And what makes Amnesiac really interesting is that it's an interesting, not quite perfectly formed thing, and that's why it's compelling to me, at least. And the thing, like lots of my favorite double albums, the first half is visibly different to the second half, and that's why they work as like two sides of the same coin. And you can make that argument for Kid A and Amnesiac, but I think what you'd end up with, instead of one perfectly formed thing and one really interesting, slightly flawed thing, is one collectively quite messy thing.
Jake, I'm curious what you think about this because you're the only other person beside me who's read Stephen Hyden's book, which talks about this idea at length. And I'm not saying I think it's a good idea. I just think it's an interesting thought experiment. So I'm curious what you think about it.
Yeah, I listened to his suggested Kid Amnesiac playlist a couple like a month or two ago when I actually read the book, and just like again, I also just sort of appreciate it as a thought experiment, just because a lot of these albums have B-sides, and I think that it's definitely a good thing that they like release these apart and everything, but I like the idea of maybe throwing it around with Amnesiac specifically and Amnesiac's B-sides, because the prospect of making a double album is interesting, but it also, to me, like, your perfect version of Amnesiac might lie in how you throw this together. You could put tracks from Kid A on there. You could leave them off entirely and just do the B-sides of this album, and you could sort of playlist together like your version of it. And I feel like that might be like the key for some people who, if you're not into this album, you turn it into more of an exercise for yourself and being like, okay, so I'll take these songs and maybe I will take a track or two from Kid A if it strikes my fancy, and you can sort of put it and sort of not like a make your own album, but like I definitely feel like there's enough fully formed ideas on there, and there's enough consistent sonic moments to the point where like you could sort of create your own journey with this, and I like that as an idea. I like the Kid Amnesiac playlist that Haydn made just because I do think that it has a specific flow to it. The only problem I encounter is that while it makes a lot of Amnesiac easier to appreciate, and at the same time it makes Kid A harder to appreciate when you combine them together. Is that Kid A gets so much mileage out of its very, very deliberate structure. That's what we talked about in the last episode, that it was just like, it's unconventional, but it also like it absolutely had to be that way to achieve what it was going for. So if you mess with that a little bit, it's gonna suffer a bit. But if you just kind of want to get into Amnesiac more, it's definitely something that's worth trying.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
think that's part of why it feels so like sacrilegious to me to listen to it that way. Or like, because like in the years that I've had these albums in my life, this is something that I've tried to do on my own and just never. No, because like I think part of the appeal of Amnesiac is that it almost feels formless, and like the form of Kid A is so specifically what makes it great. And like I don't know, I just you don't. And
no,
maybe
I completely agree, and I think
maybe
what
this
you're
is just a little obsessive compulsive, but
no, I totally agree. I think what you're saying is the point of this conversation, right? Is that it says a lot. Like why I think the Kid Amnesiac thing is interesting is not because I think you could improve or make an interesting album, although maybe you could make an interesting album. I like Jake's thought that perhaps you could make the most interesting album by just switching out certain songs on Amnesiac for certain songs that were in the Amnesiac B-sides. That's something I think you could certainly do to make a different album that might be better or might not be.
If I do that, this goes up like a full point and a half.
Yeah, same.
There you go. But
Throw
what I
Cut
find
Tooth on there for God's sake.
Yeah, Fog is a great song as well.
Worry
I would totally
Ward.
put that on the album.
Amazing Sound of Orgy, also
yeah.
great song.
I like any of them.
Transatlantic Drawl, really underrated.
Yeah, I don't dislike any of those songs.
People are saying this.
What I think is interesting is that it's not just like, Kid Amnesiac, herder, but like the fact that this is even a conversation. Like perhaps it is just because they said in an offhand comment that they were thinking about, they briefly thought about the possibility of making a double album. But what I think this speaks to, without kind of like, and I'm going to maybe potentially undercut my own position on really loving Amnesiac here, but what it potentially speaks to is the fact that when fans experience something from an artist that is underwhelming or that confronts their expectations in a way that doesn't sit right with them, there's this, you often see this sort of tendency to kind of reconcile it somehow and try and make it make sense. And perhaps you could throw that argument onto me and say that I'm like trying to justify Amnesiac by, holding up all of its flaws as strengths. I could totally understand that being levied at me. But what I think is interesting,
disingenuous.
Well, I could see it, but yeah. what I see is
point is I'll kick their ass.
What I see happening is you see this a lot. I think is that fans of a certain band will try to kind of make excuses for stuff that doesn't work as well for them by kind of inventing a new reality, basically, or like trying to kind of come up with a solution to the problem, which is what I think Kid Amnesiac is kind of partially representative of. And that's maybe a more cynical attitude to approach the Kid Amnesiac subject with. But I think it's two sides of a certain coin. One is trying to see if these very weird and esoteric songs can be combined in a new way to create something different as a thought experiment. And the other side is like whether it is simply a question of trying to solve the problem of Amnesiac. So I think there's these interesting dynamics that are created by this whole thought experiment.
I mean, I'll say this, right? The only Radiohead album I could even conceive of working with a side B other album is one I already love to fucking pieces, being a Moonshaped Pool.
Are you talking about in Rainbows?
Well, in Rainbows for me is like, and this is true of all the other records, they are so wonderfully, beautifully focused on what they are. And why I love Moonshaped Pool is like, oh, that idea is amazing. Oh, that idea is amazing. That other idea is amazing. And I could see that going on for slightly longer.
Another reason why I bring this up is kind of a primer for something we'll be talking about in a few weeks' time when we talk about the King of Limbs, because I'm presenting this Kid Amnesiac idea, which I don't really subscribe to. Like, I've got my own Kid Amnesiac as an experiment. It's fun. I don't really listen to it all that often, but when it comes to a record like King of Limbs, and I won't go into it because we're obviously not reviewing that. When it comes to a record like King of Limbs, I'm more than willing to fuck with that record because I see that as quite a flawed record that could be improved very easily through rearranging and adding songs and stuff. So it's an interesting thing where it's to a certain extent, we will be selective in the way that we engage with whether we think it's okay to kind of like manipulate art or like change something, improve something from its original vision, and whether that comes out of either not understanding the vision or just thinking the vision is all that. So that's interesting to me, and it's interesting the way that a lot of Radiohead fans engage with the music and this very sort of like a way in which reflects ownership.
Yeah, I mean, I understand why what we said in Rainbows, because the In Rainbows album 2 thing is unjustifiably great, but we'll get to that when we get to that.
Yeah.
All
I'm saying there is just tack it on to the end of In Rainbows. Like, don't change anything about Rainbows itself. Just double album.
See, that's funny because I think that is a fundamentally bad idea, even though I agree that those B-sides are great. I think what makes In Rainbows great is how concise it is.
We're all a little wrong sometimes.
Yeah, I think you're a fundamentally bad idea.
But Fuck you. But also, what's interesting
Please.
about In Rainbows in this context is there's another fan thing where it's called OK Rainbows, which you see sometimes.
Nope.
Where it's this
What in the
idea
hell?
that it's this idea that the records were designed to be interleaved so that the first song of OK Computer goes into the first song of In Rainbows goes into the second song, etc., etc., etc. Which is
That's some fucking The Shining is
the most
actually
Pink Floyd
about
shit,
the
like,
man's penis shit.
The funniest
Oh my
thing about
God.
that whole thing is that the records don't even have the same number of songs, so that idea doesn't even work. But it's like it's an really extreme example of this thing I'm talking about, where and I'm just riffing at this point. Like I'm just saying, like there's an interesting attitude that fans have to their favorite bands, where they're more than willing to talk about the craft and the genius, and then just completely toy with that when they see fit.
Yeah, and I think you could get into a whole like death of the artist thing there, of like once you release something, it's no longer yours, and people can just.
And just to be clear, I don't see the toying with the craft thing as like a negative thing. I don't think look down on people who do that. Not at all. I've done it, as I said, but I do think it's just interesting. That's all. And I wondered, I guess, whether you felt that this would solve the problem of Amnesiac for you.
Nope.
Okay.
Well,
I think I do think lumping in some of the B-sides and taking out specifically Hunting Bears and Morning Bell for like.
Yeah, did we ever really mention Hunting Bears at all?
It bears.
There's
no
nothing
mention.
to say.
Well, I mean, that I think it's important that just for the sake of it, we mention the fact that song, like, it is more than just a guitar going on, but it's like that song is 2 minutes of nothing, and that is one of the main reasons where I'm like, that is a song that just fundamentally does not need to be there.
What it is it's a nice little tribute to Neil Young's score for Jim Jarmusch's movie Dead Man, which is basically the same thing as that song, except more interesting and varied. But it's the same guitar style, the same kind of languorous tone, and it's like, okay, neat little tribute to that. Why is it on the album?
Why is that not a B-side? Like, come on. Come on.
I'll say one thing about a band of a completely different level of prestige. There's none, they don't have any, but there was a point in history when I was a fan of them where the band All Time Low had just put out an album, and then
what fresh hell is this?
No prestige. But then they put out essentially an album with a few unreleased tracks put back into it, and it was 11,000 times better. So I'm not saying that this thing it can't happen.
It's an age-old thing. You could talk about it in the context of loads of different albums from loads of different artists, but it is particularly curious with Amnesiac. August, did you have anything you wanted to add? I think you started speaking before.
Yes, I actually do, believe it or not. So I pondered the question a lot of a kid Amnesiac, and first off, it's obviously a bad idea. That bears no repeating, but in the theoretical world where you were to try to do such a thing, I had my own idea for how you would do it.
Awesome.
And that would be to make an album. Basically, what I've thought a lot about is how a lot of what Kid A and Amnesiac are about is their own individual emotional tenors. And a lot of what I've seen in terms of this Kid Amnesiac idea is something trying to combine those emotional tenors or fuse them in a way. And I think that's the completely wrong approach if you're going to do something like this. My thoughts are you take the very politically oriented songs on these albums and turn that into its own thing and make a more biting, political, gritty type album with tracks obviously like Life in a Glass House, like Spinning Plates, Dollars and Cents, You and Whose Army, maybe even throw in Idiotech, the national anthem, Optimistic, In Limbo. Do some kind of combination like that to make something where you're creating your own individual emotional tone rather than trying to combine the two. I think if you were to theoretically try this idea, I think that's the best approach for making a sort of hybrid album.
It do be
August, have you
happening.
considered being my manager? Like,
Yeah, sure. I can do it. I'll take 15%.
of nothing.
Jesus Christ.
15% of
50, let me think. 15% of 0 is carry the 7. Fuck you.
I would also say, if you were to go along that political bent as well, I would chuck in Amazing Sounds of Orgy, which is totally a very political song about, like, you know, oppressive fucking structures and shit. And that song is just dope as hell. It has these booming drums that I love.
Everybody
Okay.
sing Kumbaya.
Okay. Well, this is one of our most chaotic videos, I think, weirdly.
Fittingly, I think.
Fittingly
yes.
for this fucking album, which, you know,
Mhm.
is what it is. But let's do our favorite tracks and ratings then. And
Yeah.
put a nice, fat, juicy bow on this motherfucking
Why is
plane.
the bow juicy?
I was gonna
We'll put
ask
a-
that exact same question. I was like, a
We'll-
fat
we'll
and
put-
juicy bow.
We'll put a tighter bow on this record than Radiohead did.
Oh,
About to go crazy.
I'm gonna commit.
I'm about to do it.
Giles Corey.
I am at my fucking limit.
I can't fucking take it anymore.
Jake, what are your favorite tracks and least favorite track and rating for Kid and for fucking Amnesiac? Fuck.
for the Radiohead
Rock
album,
over
Amnesiac.
England.
Rock on Chicagus. My 3 favorite tracks are Pyramid Song, obviously. I'm also going to say I really do care for Pull Revolving Doors, and kind of a toss-up just because I like a lot of the other songs about the same, but I have a feeling this track won't get shouted out by many, so I will say I'm actually a big fan of Packed Like Sardines in a Crushed Tin Box. It's always been a disarming thing about this album that I've very much appreciated and gotten on board with. Least favorite is certainly Hunting Bears. Useless, Get It Away, and I give the album a 6.5.
Some ratings.
Fucking Life in a Glass House. I might be wrong. And I will say like Spinning Plates. Least favorite, Morning Bell / Amnesiac. And I will give this a 7.5 out of 10.
My favorite tracks are Give Me Two Hot Sex. Pull.
On the double, I'm in a goddamn hurry.
You and Who Saw Me and Life in a Glass House. You know, say my least favorite is Let's Go Hunting Bears. Fuck it. And it gives me great joy to be able to do this in person for the first time. I'm giving this an 8 out of 10.
Give me a Dr. Pepper on the double, and I'm in a goddamn hurry. Junior, you want anything? Hush puppies, Daddy.
For someone who's in a hurry, you're taking your time with this bit.
Ain't got time for this album.
Damn.
Me talking about King of Limbs.
No, I have plenty of time for all of them. My 3 favorite tracks are, I didn't really emphasize this, but I think the 2 best songs are just the last 2 on this album, like Spinning Plates, Life in a Glass House, and 3rd place, Knives Out. I can't believe I didn't say Pyramid Song. So Pyramid Song is definitely one of the best songs on this album, like it's top 3, but it is like, it's like I said, it doesn't feel
ubiquitous.
Yeah,
it's like duh.
Yeah, I feel like kind of a coward for picking it.
And the least favorite track on this record is Hunting Bears, and this album gets an 8 out of 10 from me.
It's like bears with the big red emoji bee.
That was exactly what I was trying to like, the energy I was trying to give off with it. So
Hunting Bears is me on a pub crawl.
Yeah. Oh.
Oh,
It's
no.
so funny because like
Oh.
homophones.
I thought, like my mind went
Jesus
not to,
Christ.
not to bears, as in the gay term, but to like making bears. Like when you were a kid, you had to go to the bathroom, and your guardian would be like, "Oh, you got
It's
bears now?"
Homophones.
I think so. I think Saoirse meant alcohol beer.
Oh, I thought she meant big gay dudes.
I bet
It's hilarious
alcohol
that she
beer.
said pub crawl and you went to big gay dudes.
Large homosexual.
Y'all never
Morgan,
heard of y'all
I
never
went
heard of a
there
gay
too,
bar?
and that's why I left.
It's not crazy.
We need to reenact the world's end, except it's exclusively gay bars.
Yes.
I mean, that movie's already.
We actually
gay.
have a pub called the World's End. We have a pub called the World's End in London. We can find gay people there. It's fine.
Yeah.
I happened
to a
by
gay
that
bar.
pub. I happened by that pub when I was there. And I was just like, oh.
I went in and they were playing Green Day.
All right. Let's August. What are your 3 favorite tracks, least favorite track, and rating for Amnesia?
All right.
Hail to the Creep.
My 3 favorite tracks on here would have to be, I'd say my favorite is definitely Life in a Glass House, Knives Out, and Packed Like Sardines in a Crushed Tin Box. I'd say my least favorite is Polk Pull Revolving Doors.
L.
Tyler is going to pass
Yeah.
away.
Yeah, shove this L up your butthole.
It's okay.
It
I just
wouldn't
take
fit, it's
satisfaction
gotta
in
bend.
August for once having a normie take.
All right. I give it a 5 out of 10.
Fair enough.
So
Okay. Let us know.
that's a flat.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, average.
That's a flat 7. Equivalent to 10 Buttons by Broadcast, the latest Godspeed You Black Emperor, and the latest Wolf Alice.
Cool. Let us know at home what you think of Amnesiac, what this record means to you. Obviously, we came at this record. If you're a huge fucking Amnesiac, you got a fucking body pillow, then you're gonna fucking.
How do the
Your body
dimensions of
pillow
that
just-
work?
Your body pillow just like that.
If
Yeah,
The
you're
body
a
pillow
huge,
is shaped
little
like
dude.
this.
And
If
it's
Like
you're
it's
a-
just this,
this
your
tall.
phone screen.
if you're a huge Stan Amnesiac, then let us know in the comments below what you think of this album, what we might have missed about it when we talked about it. Obviously, we're only 5 people. We can't cover every perspective possible on a record. So if you disagree, let us know in the comments below. Let us know what you thought of the video as well. There will also be in the description box a playlist where you can access all the other videos in this series if you haven't seen them all yet. And next week, we'll be back same time to talk about Hail to the Thief. Rock over London, rock over England.
Sega Genesis. The more you play with it, the harder it gets.
Oh no! Is that Morgan is fully Blair Witched.
I
Yeah.
love that was a haunting image of Morgan.
That's actually one they used, by the way.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
Okay.
By the way, on the subject of Amnesiac body pillow, because I feel this hasn't been fully
Where
fully
is this going?
addressed.
Where is
Alright,
this going?
So what it's gonna be is it's gonna be the guy on the front cover with his like he's gonna be like turned around pushing his ass forwards towards you. That's the body pillow cover.
I sent a meme into the Discord where it's the Amnesiac cover, but it's got "Are you winning, son?" on the side of it.
I saw that.
Are you all just ignoring us?
I can't process it.
Just keep doing it.
Fuck your father. Fuck your father. Fuck your father.
Oh my god.
Okay.
Please put that at the end
Cut
of the
me
episode
down.
as another.
Oh, yeah.
Please
Yeah.
don't watch this segment.
Oh yeah.
So I need to go to the loo. I'm really
Ooh.
Welcome everybody to a brand new episode of the Jams and Tea podcast, where we spin the jams and spill the tea. And today, we are doing something very special. We are not going to be covering two releases. This is just the Radiohead Retrospective episode.
Oh, okay.
So if you see this and don't see the other shit that we do, don't panic. Because this week we are also going to be doing our reprisal of the Great Jams and Tea Music Quiz. So please, if you have not seen that yet, go check it out.
Jake, I'll interrupt you only to say that remember, this is going to be the last thing we record today that will be posted. Yes. So all of
I thought it was going to be posted before.
No, I mean,
or after. I mean.
Yeah, so we do the Radiohead videos come out on Thursdays, and the quiz is going to come out at the time our normal episodes come out on Sunday. So,
okay. I didn't know if that was being changed or not. My bad.
That's okay.
Scrap that entire thing then.
So you can if you want to, you can reference.
Die immediately. God damn it!
If you want to, you can reference everything else that's going up.
God, just you do the fucking intro. I'm not gonna.
Sorry, sorry. I didn't mean to.
It is literally not your fault. I am just an idiot.
Tyler's just like, I'm gonna fuck up this man's whole career.
They fucking want to die. Not even drunk, and I just sound like a fucking buffoon.
Don't we all?
You cool bug facts.
You oaf.
All right.
August left. God damn it!
No, I'm here.
Oh.
Did this? Oh fuck! Is this fucking up? I swear. I fucking swear. This is just what I need. Webcam decides it's ruined. I guess we're not doing me with a video today.
Oh shit. Do you have any other way of... Hang on, there you are. You're back.
Maybe.
You're visible now.
Okay.
I can't play that on mandolin, Jake. I'm really sorry.
The most important thing is your audio anyway, which seems to be fine.
Yeah.
But you are visible, so
okay.
Hopefully it'll hold together. All right.